bow like on rank 5 are not that good because this is just the first bow that we can get. We only know about another bow that was used during the state of play, the longbow that blasts enemies away, and we already saw like in that moment when Jin was picking up this longbow an empty slot. So maybe for another bow that we can find. We already know that there are some ranged skills that you can unlock. So if you like using the bow, and as I said before, I think it looks really good. Then you can focus on that. Although we will of course be mostly fighting with our katana. And we got some new footage of the melee combat. But before we go over that, I first want to take a look at some of the new art they recently released. It once again shows how diverse the world of this game can be, with Jin arriving in a village with like a huge tree there in the distance. And just an awesome shot of Jin looking over the field on his horse. And as I told you before in a previous video, we should be able to choose our horse at the start of the game. So they will likely like function the same, but they might look a little bit different. And then bam, we are in a snowy area. Talk about diverse. And I love that the buildings are covered in snow here too. And we see a deep forest. And here we see a gate and a camp likely taken over by the Mongols that are of course all over Tsushima Island. And we got some new gameplay that looks to be close to this in a burnt forest. And apart from the gameplay, we also learned some new combat details. We see Jin surrounded by a ton of enemies, and these Mongols will be very aggressive and they will try to attack you most as well, like Jin removing his mask and is kinda tired, but he has to go on. And going back to the gameplay, because we can actually block and counter the incoming moves. We need to hold L1 for a block, but more effective is really waiting for the incoming attack to hit you. And if you then press L1 at the right time, you do a parry and then you open the enemy up for a counter attack. This also gives you a bit of resolve, and that is the yellow orb that we see above our health bar. But you can also upgrade this counter, likely with a skill point, to make it a dose of resolve. So more than normal, and with resolve you can heal yourself. And we now see that in action for the first time, and it heals like 1/3 of your health bar, so that is pretty big. But you can also use it to do powerful moves, as we saw one time during the state of play, but that's really the only sort of special ability we ever saw in action. Sucker Punch also talks in this blog post that I will link to in the video description. You can read it if you want to learn even more about the game. They talk about how they want to make the blade feel sharp, mostly referring to the fact that enemies have to drop fast, but that Jin can also die fast, because the weapons from the enemy are also very lethal. So during development they toyed around with making enemies a little more bullet spongy. You can't really call it that, but you know what I mean, right? But that did not really work, so they always want to make sure that enemies can die from a few strikes. But there will still be tougher enemies, of course, like the general that we see right here cannot be assassinated, so you still can do a ton of damage, but then have to take him out in another way. I overall really like to make the comparison with Jedi Fallen Order, where the lightsaber always felt powerful as well, like even on the higher difficulties, regular enemies could still die from one hit, and I think that Ghost of Tsushima will be kind of the same feeling. We mostly see Jin do some rapid slashes, but he will also have slower, more power. Back to a parry is really important for high level play, Sucker Punch notes. And it will also be really important to master the different stances that Jin has. We already saw Jin use some of them in the state of play, but now we also have some new footage that focuses on this particular aspect. So the stone stance should be handy for fighting Mongol swordsmen, but then after taking them out you want to switch to the water stance if you have only shield wearing enemies left. 2 strikes to break the defense and then you can take them out. And we also see in a brief moment here that we can pick up a kunai from an enemy even if we haven't used it against them. So that is pretty cool to know. These knives looked pretty powerful in the ghost footage, and now we know that you can actually get them from taking out enemies. We know that Jin's family katana is called the Sakai Storm. Again, that was also noted in that blog article. Link is in the description. I think we see him grab it here in the story trailer. And I'm sure that we will get more trailers and other footage as we get closer to the July 17th date. We also recently learned that Ghost of Tsushima will be playable on PlayStation 5 at launch via backwards compatibility.